Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Michael Swetnam. I'm the CEO of the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, and it's my honor and privilege to welcome you today to a seminar on terrorism in the Middle East and Africa. I'm sure many of you, or most of you, are aware of the International Center for Terrorism Studies, headed by Professor Yona Alexander, that for many decades has been looking into all aspects of terrorism, its cause, and how we can deal with it. For the last almost 20 years, the center has been at the Potomac Institute, and it's been our great privilege to host these seminars on Yona's work. The International Center has produced at least one academic volume, if not 3 or 4 per year, several reports every year. We have many examples, including this one today, which has just been released. Another one was released yesterday, I believe, on Russia and Asia, and it has been the center's focus for, as I said, a couple decades, to look at how terrorism has been used as a tool to disrupt governments and society all around the world, to look at how different governments, different cultures have dealt with it, look at what's worked and what has not worked, to document that in an academic setting such that the lessons learned from dealing with terrorism around the world can be studied, looked at, and hopefully will improve our ways and our capability for dealing with it. In keeping with that tradition and trend, as I said, for a couple decades, Professor Yona Alexander has brought together today, once again, as always, one of the most distinguished and experienced panel of individuals who have dealt with terrorism in its various forms across the Middle East, Africa, into, in fact, Europe. So I think you'll agree with me that we have an opportunity today to hear some of the best lessons learned, interact with those who have dealt with it on the ground and strategically at governments and in communities, and hopefully increase our knowledge and our ability to deal with terrorism. I'd like to personally thank Professor Alexander for the 2 decades that he's allowed me to work with him on these types of issues. He is probably, in my mind, one of the greatest academics in the world, and we're very, very, very privileged to have him not just with us here today, but with us in the world for as long as he'll stay with us. So with that, let me introduce the person who needs no introduction to this crowd, Professor Yona Alexander.
Thank you, Mike, for your generous introduction. The main point is that we cannot deal with the challenges without international cooperation, so I would like to also welcome the diplomats from dozens of countries and the media, of course, the academics, and so on. Let me first introduce the panel briefly, and then I would like to make a few footnotes and move on to our discussion. Next to Mike is General Gray, as you know, the 29th Commandant of the Marine Corps, and he will also introduce our keynote speaker, General William Ward, who is sitting next to him. Then we are going to have a presentation from Wafa Baghdis East from the Embassy of Libya. Next to her is the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Embassy of Tunisia, Muaz Muhammadi. And finally, we have also another distinguished diplomat, Dr. Abdelaziz, who is the political counselor at the embassy of the Egyptian embassy. And obviously, we cannot conduct any discussion without academics. So we are delighted to have today Professor Muhammad Ben Hamdi, who is the president of the Moroccan Center for Strategic Studies, and General Gray, as always, will have the last word. Now, just a couple of footnotes in terms of our academic work that Mike mentioned. This year alone, we had discussions right here at the National Press Club on international cooperation combating terrorism. And we also dealt with the Sunni-Shia divide and dealing with the Russian challenge in the Middle East and beyond, and dealing with NATO and so forth. Now, we have to remind ourselves that terrorism is only one out of many challenges that we have to consider. I'm talking about security challenges, and clearly natural disasters, epidemics is also, I think, of grave concern, as we have seen with the Ebola crisis in Africa and beyond, and so on. But obviously, we're going to focus on man-made disasters that we see it daily. And I think we have to keep in mind that no community and no country and no region is affected by terrorism. Yesterday, we had the plane hijacking in Egypt, although it's not a terrorist incident, as we know, but the modus operandi at least remind us the challenges that we are facing. And Sunday, obviously, we saw with grave concern what happened in Pakistan, Lahore, which really exposed again and again the ugly face of terror. In other words, there is no end to the evil intentions, and there is no end to the imagination of the terrorists. And the list goes on and on, all the way from Paris to Brussels to California and elsewhere. So I think we have to keep this in mind, and we have to keep in mind the trends that we see, particularly in regard to the expansion of the Islamic State. According to the record that we could really follow from the United Nations and some of the intelligence community, there are close to 40,000 volunteers and fighters throughout the world who joined the so-called Islamic State, or Daesh. This is actually much larger, 7 times larger, those volunteers or fighters who joined the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. What is of grave concern that we don't always realize is the threat that is generated in the North African region, as well as the Sahel and throughout Africa. In fact, out of the 40 identified groups around the world that they are partners, quote unquote, in other words, in terms of declaring allegiance, in terms of providing support to the Daesh, we find that about 20 of them are located in Africa. In this connection, I would like to mention again our publication that Mike already referred to, that is being released today. It deals with the threat throughout the region. I'm not going to go into details because we do have, fortunately, with us, General Ward, who is going to deal with some of these issues, except this map. This map tells everything that one has to really recognize in terms of the analysis of the nature and the intensity and the impact of the fact. In other words, for many years we were concerned about the al-Qa'ida, especially after 9/11, when an increasing number of terrorist attacks took place in North Africa and the Sahel, and somehow the world was silent and did not recognize at the time. In fact, Algeria was the first country that was victimized in the 1990s after the Mujahideen came back from Afghanistan to Algeria. But at any rate, the point I'm making is today, basically every country in the continent, all the way from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, has some form of link or cell or sympathizers of the Daesh. So, in other words, we're talking about the so-called caliphate without borders, and throughout Africa, if you have the opportunity, try to read that report, and General, I think, Ward will go into some details. So again, the threat is growing by day, hopefully, okay? And this week, as you well know, right here in Washington, there is a summit on nuclear security, and there are representatives from all over the world, from Africa, Europe, Asia, and so on, to deal also with the issue of the nuclear terrorism. So it's only a matter of time. It's not if, but when and where that we would have to face also a nuclear terrorist incident and catastrophe. And we have to be concerned because even according to the last reports about Europe, we know that the Daesh had some intentions to target the nuclear facilities and so on, and maybe explode a dirty bomb. So with this grim introduction, I would like to introduce great American General Gray.
Well, good morning. It's my distinct privilege to have an opportunity to, on behalf of the Potomac Institute, to introduce a great warrior, a great American, and someone I just know that you're going to really be delighted to listen to, and no matter how smart you are, I predict you're going to learn something. General Kip Ward has been a distinguished Army officer for over 40 years. Most importantly, and I encourage you to read his bio because you need to read that and understand how he developed and where his ideas came from and the like and how he applied them. He started out as an infantry platoon commander, and that's where you really learn about people. And you find out real quick that everything you get done as a young lieutenant, you get done through people. And so it just makes common sense, if you will, to take care of them the very best way you know how, and to try to bring them home alive if conflict is there. He went up through a really distinguished Army career and the like. He's been to all the schools. He's held all the command billets from lieutenant all the way up through division commander and the like. And then later, of course, he was the first commander of the Africa Command, which he will talk to us about today. And now he's the president and the COO of a very interesting company in the corporate world. And we were chatting a little bit earlier before this thing started, and I said, you know, some of the leadership things that you picked up in the military are apropos in the commercial world as well, because still it's all done by people, and we need to learn to take care of them, and he agreed to that. We were also chatting before he was born. I graduated from high school in 1945, and at 17, and my I played football and the like, and my best friend was from Brielle, the Manasquan High School across the river, and they were our traditional rivals. And he and I had grown up and known each other for a long time, and later he went to the same school at Morgan State. Only it was he was a freshman there in 1946, and that's back when you had good athletes at Morgan State. Later, when you got there, they kind of dwindled off. But at any rate, so we had a chat about that. So with no further ado here, I'm proud to introduce General Kip Ward.
Well, let me start off by saying good morning and extending a huge vote of gratitude of thanks to Professor Alexander, Michael Sweatman, for extending this invitation to me to be here this morning to address this group. And always, that general there needs absolutely zero introduction, no endorsement by Kip Ward, because General Al Gray is clearly one of our nation's iconic heroes. And General, sir, let me thank you for your service over years that you continue to do and all that you've done, not just for Marines, but for all of us who've worn the cloth of our nation. Thanks very much. When Professor Alexander contacted me about coming here this morning, I said, well, Professor, I'm not an academician. I've not published great volumes or tomes for those to read, and in fact, knowing what you do, why would I contribute to this austere occasion and offer something to this group? He said, General, that's exactly why we want you there. General Gray talked about my career, and I'll briefly highlight a couple of things that might be instructive as I go through the remainder of my comments. Over 40 years as an infantryman. My first 20 years as a soldier, I spent ensuring our nation that should the great nemesis of the Cold War impact our national security, we were going to defeat it. And I did that, assigned to units in Europe, in Korea, mechanized units, armored units. I did that assigned to contingency force units, 82nd Airborne Division, here in the United States. The last 20 years presented a different paradigm, and I'll talk about that. Since 9/11, the security challenges that we face have grave global implications, and they've emerged globally. Middle East, Africa, Europe, Asia, all regions. Terrorist networks, particularly al-Qa'ida and Daesh, but including Boko Haram, the most treacherous of these organizations, killing hundreds of people a week that goes unreported there in the Sahel. Al-Shabaab, they're expanding deadly operations across this arc of instability that exists without borders. Topic for today, combating terrorism, lessons learned. Lessons learned. Middle East, North Africa, and the Sahel, and beyond. This enemy that possesses state-like features, not a state, espouses to be one. How do we recognize it? Not too long ago, you had a great presentation here by a youngster. I call him a youngster. You call me a youngster. I call Vince Stewart a youngster, our current director of the DIA. And he presented an extremely accurate, from my perspective, laydown of what this enemy is. So I won't dare to expand upon what he said about Daesh and this force, but that is an enemy that has permeated our global commons. We indeed live in a complex security environment. We knew our enemy when I was a lieutenant. We knew who it was, we knew where it was, we knew its intent, we knew how it operated. We could devise a plan to defeat it, should it dare challenge us. In 1992, I was a brigade commander, 10th Mountain Division. I went to Somalia to help guarantee humanitarian relief in an impoverished and devastated land. And in 1992, I discovered what I had trained to do for 20 years as an infantryman just wasn't working quite well in this environment. My young sergeants, who were out doing what they did in villages and hamlets, working with tribal elders and leaders, would come back to me and say, "Hey, Colonel, this is not about fire maneuver here. This is about other things to help guarantee stability." And we talked about that, and we got through that a bit, but we knew then that the enemy presented a different face, operated with different tactics, gained its authority through different means, mostly intimidation and terror. Lesson learned, did we pay attention to it? Maybe, maybe not. Some years later, I was fortunate enough to be asked to go to Egypt to be the U.S. security coordinator with the Egyptian Armed Forces. An assignment that I absolutely treasured then and still think it was one of the best assignments that I ever held, because it exposed me to understanding the importance of understanding those with whom you work that may not be just like you. Important tour, and tour, as the general indicated, helped create this mosaic that were to form things that I later came to believe in as I moved along. Had the great opportunity to command a 25th Infantry Division, a part of the U.S. Pacific Command's area of responsibility, traveling all over the South Asia region, again, being exposed to folks who were not like me, not like my soldiers, but learning. Lessons learned, lessons learned. I told the general he probably gave my talk in his summation because it's so true. It's about how you understand people and how you build relationships. And that theme will come forth again as I talk here. So that asymmetrical threat that we faced in 1992, it was there. Things went on in the Balkans. And on September 11th, 2001, as I sat in the Pentagon as the Vice Director of Operations on the Joint Staff, that threat became real in no uncertain terms. And as I spent 4 days in that Pentagon without leaving, doing things to help determine what our response would be to that devastating attack that would change all of us, to be sure we were in a new era. Lessons learned, we all got a crash course in it that day, and we continue to receive it. That traditional enemy that we had trained to defeat as a military no longer existed. And maintaining security and protecting our national interests needed to occur more than at the end of a rifle, by delivering a main gun round out of an Abrams tank, by dropping a bomb from a B-1, or by firing a missile from a frigate. To be sure, that needed to be there, but more was required. More is required. I go to the Balkans, as the NATO commander of the stabilization force in Bosnia-Herzegovina in 2003, trying to establish stability and put things together so that there was what I called then a horizon of hope for people. That wasn't happening because I was a combat veteran. That was happening because I better have been paying attention to other things in that environment that would make a difference. I went in 2005 to be the United States Security Coordinator to Israel and the Palestinian Authority. These lessons continue to reinforce themselves. What is it that we are doing to help bring stability to an environment? This notion of security that I had been taught as a lieutenant, captain, colonel, as a young infantryman, my first 20 years, was exposing to me its limits with respect to the total dimension of how we approach addressing this arc of instability. I was very fortunate to have been selected to be the inaugural commander of the United States Africa Command. I'd served in 4 of our nation's geographic commands at that point, and varying assignments. So how was this one to be different? It was, if it is to address challenges that we face, and to be sure, in 2006 and 2007, as we were discussing it, terrorism was well known to us all. We've talked about those incidents that had led to us having it smacked right in our faces. Because of what that young sergeant said to me on one of my trips in Somalia in early part of 1993, visiting him, I knew stability was more than just what we brought to this dynamic. What we brought was absolutely critical and essential, to be sure, but it needed more. And what was the more? What was the lesson? We talk about it today like it's been around forever. In 2007, we weren't talking about the importance of development. We weren't talking about the importance of understanding the society in which we were operating, knowing what was important to the people who lived there, where they were, and doing things in a sustained way to address that, such that they had a stake in their own stability because they had a horizon of hope. We weren't talking about it. And you say, well, why are you as a soldier talking about it? Because I'm talking about it because when it doesn't happen, my soldiers, Marines, sailors, get called into harm's way to help bring security and stability. And I'd much rather not do that. To be sure, prepared to do it. That's what my nation asked me to do. That's what I took an oath to do as I wore the cloth of the nation. In my mind's eye, that ought be our last resort to achieve the stability that we all desire on these global commons. As this condition has continued to move forward, it is even more imperative that those things that are associated with stability, defense to be sure, but as was pointed out by Professor Alexander, it's more than that. This economic horizon, this horizon that will create something for communities that exist in this vast area that we've been talking about, even I, before al-Qa'ida in Islamic Maghreb, al-Para, and as was pointed out, we weren't paying attention. But the conditions that spawned the creation of those sorts of activities still exist. So how are we to address it? What are the lessons learned? We have built great systems to deal with the security aspect. Intelligence fusion centers and cells, sustained engagement, combined in joint operations to address threats, the use of our special operations forces, the use of our conventional forces. I offer that that same level of engagement is important across this arc of instability in other areas as well. What is our sustained developmental engagement? What is our sustained diplomatic engagement? You'll hear other members of the panel talk about the role of the various countries in North Africa play in helping to build security, what they are doing. I offer some of it will be done by having better trained intelligence, better fused and integrated intelligence, better sharing of intelligence. Some of it will come by having better trained and efficient security forces, be they national armed forces, be they police forces. Much of it will come because the economic requirements, the developmental issues associated with the living condition of folks in an area takes a turn that will cause those who live there to see for themselves a horizon of hope where they are. Where they are. Whose responsibility is that? I offer that it is our collective responsibility, just as we took collective action to address it in a military perspective, that same collective action ought to be taken to address it from a developmental perspective. In this, that third D that we talk about today, some call it diplomacy, some call it democracy. It's about good governance. It's about good governance. To that end, what is our sustained level of engagement? Just as we have to have sustained security engagement, we must have sustained developmental and diplomatic engagement. We must devote some portion of our national treasure to that effort. We don't bear that burden alone as the United States of America. The global community bears it as a global community because the threat is a global threat. What have we built to address the work that's being done by Shabab, by Boko Haram, by Daesh, who has now, with Boko Haram, caused that affiliation to be seen in ways never before realized? As we move forward, as we look at programs, as we look at processes, this notion of sustained engagement for me comes home in this regard. I love our men and women who wear the uniform of our nation. I am who I am and where I am because of them, and I know that they, as we are engaged globally, not just because we are side by side fighting with them, and to be sure we are prepared to do that, but we are side by side engaging with them, causing a dynamic to occur whereby there's mutual learning going on, us understanding better, they seeing a different way, and taking advantage of that to bring that stability to where they are. We can't be everywhere, but we must be somewhere. In this modern age of social media, et cetera, this notion of virtual reality is out there and we can do things virtually. You don't build relationships virtually. You build relationships because you're there. One of the best tools that we have at our disposal is how we build relationships with our friends to cause our common objectives to be realized. As the inaugural commander of U.S. Africa Command, one of our main focus priorities was to cause a level of sustained security engagement with our partners and friends across North Africa, the Sahel, and sub-Saharan Africa, so that they knew that they could depend on us to be there. I offer that is no true in Europe, in Asia, the Middle East, other places where us being a part of the dynamic to create stability across a range of activities will make a difference. Doesn't take a lot. Doesn't take a lot. But it takes something. And where we dedicate resources, and our greatest resource in my mind's eye are American sons and daughters who willingly don the uniform of our nation to go forward and serve. We ought to take advantage of that. What are the lessons learned? They're many, they're varied, but they are at hand. And as we work with partners around the globe, our ability to make a difference to address the arc of instability in ways beyond force of arms ought to be a priority. We can never back away from that, but it ought not be our first resort of action. And as we support it in ways that will make a difference, we will be able to establish this horizon of hope such that neighborhoods, communities, nations, regions are doing more for themselves because of the support, the cooperation, the collaboration that's being received by the community of nations in their environments. Let me close by saying this. We must present and cause our friends and allies and all those whose interests are threatened by terrorism to present across the range of activities, defense, development, diplomacy, a scenario that causes those who are impacted in these regions to see a horizon of hope so that they take a stake and take action to address this threat. And while that's going on, we will continue to take those off the scene who are just bad actors. But that's not all that's required. These other pieces of it are also important. And as we saw in the creation of AFRICOM, that in large measure has been adopted by other combatant and regional commands, our engagement, our relationship building, our understanding of what's important for peoples in those regions, and then addressing it in real ways that are important to them where they are. That's going to make a difference. And I've seen that around the world, from Europe to the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. Those are lessons of a soldier over a 40-year career when he didn't know a whole lot about much other than getting to know people, understanding what was important to them, addressing it in some way, however modest, so that they then took steps to help create stability in their regions, because that's in our national interest. Thank you very much.
Take some questions.
I know it's embarrassed, but
Thank you.
Very good.
thank you very much, General, for your very profound insight and experiences, particularly what works, what doesn't work. I'm sure we'll have many questions for you, but if we may, we would like to proceed with our colleagues to make brief statements about their own perspectives, and then we'll have a Q&A discussion. Next, Wafa, would you kindly go over there? Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
working?
It's on. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this important event and thank you for hosting me to speak on this important subject to all of us, the terrorism that has affected all of our lives. And combating terrorism is also a personal matter to me, as I lost members of my family and my friends who were brutally killed by terrorists in my own city of Benghazi in Libya. I cannot agree more with the remarks of General William. It's true that stabilizing insecure nations is the only way to have a sustainable defeat to terrorism. And I think the international community has to support weak nations to reach security and to reach stability, and that's the only way to have a sustainable defeat to terrorism. I will start by saying also that terrorism is merely a tactic, and targeting terrorism on its own is not effective. We can for sure say that it's a phenomena that is undermining our common humanity and is inherently global, and targeting it today is a vast and major work to do. The latest brutal terrorist attacks in Belgium, Lahore, and before that in Tunisia, Mali, Paris, and here in the US remind us again and again with the urgent need for more efficient, concerted international strategy to combat it. We need to broaden the way we think about this threat and take measures to prevent it from proliferating. Terrorism, no doubt, is the cancer of our age, and no one and no country is immune from it. What is most alarming in the present context is the rapid expansion of violent extremist ideologies in different parts of the world, especially in the MENA region and sub-Sahara countries. And there is no question about it. We need to cooperate on many levels to combat it, and we need to learn from our past mistakes, what worked and what didn't work. The mushrooming of counter-terrorism centers around the world, and the need for an increasing number of specialists to deal with this problem testify to the seriousness of this issue. And I'm sure we have among us here today excellent experts on the subject, such as Professor Yona Alexander, who devotes a lot of his time as the director of the Inter-University Center for Terrorism Studies to this issue and to this cause. And I thank him for the valued report that has been prepared today by their center. According to a recent UN report published in December 2015, violent extremists have been able to recruit over 30,000 foreign terrorist fighters, as I heard from him today and also from this report, from over 100 member states. They were to travel to Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Libya. The same mentioned report suggests some counter-terrorism measures that require a more comprehensive approach, which encompasses not only ongoing essential security-based counter-terrorism, but also systematic preventive measures which directly address the drivers of violent extremism that have given rise to the emergence of these new groups. I agree with the conclusions of the report. It makes a lot of sense because, in my humble opinion, we need to pay enough attention to why individuals are attracted to violent extremist groups. I'm also convinced that the creation of open, equitable, inclusive, and pluralist societies based on the full respect of human rights and with economic opportunities for all represent the most tangible and most meaningful alternative to violent extremism and the most promising strategy for rendering it unattractive. We will not be successful unless we can harness the idealism, creativity, and energy of young people and others who feel disfranchised. Young people in our societies, in particular, constitute the majority of the population of an increasing and also in an increasing number of countries in the region. And these young people must be viewed as an asset and must be empowered to make constructive contribution to the political and economical development of our societies and nations. They represent an untapped resource, and we must offer them a positive vision of the future together with a genuine chance to realize their aspirations and potential. Recent history has shown in our region, and especially in Libya, that volatile security situations and conflict tend to be further exacerbated by civil conflict and proxy wars that deepen the crisis and increase the suffering. It's also critical that in responding to this threat, we recognize that violent extremism aims at provoking states into overreacting and then exploit ill-conceived government action for their own propaganda ends. In the case of Libya, where we see political and military fragmentation, Daesh, and it's called ISIS or ISIL in some other parts, and other terrorist and criminal groups came into being and took advantage of this security vacuum to occupy a whole strategic coastal city, Sirte, undermining what's left of Libya state, and succeeded in recruiting a large number of foreign fighters who came in big waves across our uncontrolled borders. We do not know the exact numbers of those fighters, but intelligence assessments state that there are between 5,000 and 7,000 fighters. But it's noticeable that the number is on the increase, especially after what ISIS has suffered in Syria and Iraq. Libya in general and Libyan society is not hospitable to Daesh. Libyan culture and religiosity despises extremism. Throughout our history, the Libyan people are moderate in nature, and that applies to their Islamic institutions as well. However, the deteriorating economic situation in my country makes an increasing number of desperate Libyan youth vulnerable to recruitment to these radical groups. The lack of socio-economical opportunities and the marginalization, in addition to the semi-failed state and poor governance that we had during the past couple of years since our revolution, pose real challenge for any future good governance in Libya. Again, it's critical to recognize that violent extremism tends to thrive in an environment characterized by conflict, poor governance, democracy deficit, and corruption. And unfortunately, we have all of these diseases in Libya today. In addition to that, the prolonged and unresolved political conflict in the country makes it difficult to counter ISIS and come up with an effective strategy. I must also mention that it's not only ISIS that we have in Libya. There are other terrorist groups, and we feel that there is a competition between them. And we feel that the relation between them varies from one part of the country to the other, depending on the society. The different social structures and different parts of the country, that is. Violent extremist groups in Libya cynically distort and exploit religious beliefs, ethnic differences. Distortion and misuse of religion are utilized to divide our nation today, our culture, and our people, undermining the very existence of the Libyan nation. But I would like to mention that many of these radical elements came from outside Libya itself. Recent developments in different cities in Libya, such as Derna, Benghazi, Sirte, Sabratha, demonstrate that these groups cannot be rooted in the country. But it's important to add that ISIS and other terrorist groups have different makeup in different parts of Libya, as I just mentioned. In each area, they take advantage of the social problems present in that area. Nonetheless, we should recognize that all of them are symptoms of a disease. And this is so important to remember. A lot of people think that what's happening in Libya is a result of the terrorism there, but actually terrorism is just a symptom of the disease that's happened to Libya. And it's, again, terrorism, I must mention, is merely a tactic. Targeting terrorism on its own is ineffective, and we need to go beyond that. There are credible reports suggesting that Boko Haram is connected with ISIS in Libya as well, and the implications of this could be devastating to the whole region. But the spillover could reach also, and has reached, to Europe and the US itself. And as one distinguished American general suggested, and I fully agree with him, he said our strategy should create a firewall between the two groups to prevent the spread of this cancer in the area and beyond. The Islamic State, or the so-called Islamic State in Libya, is no longer a matter of a few scattered groups. It's an increasingly organized entity entranced in a country with large ungoverned spaces. And in this context, I would like to emphasize that Libya is a unique place geographically and strategically, and should be seen in that way. If we contain and defeat terrorism in Libya, we can defeat it in North Africa and the sub-Saharan region. And I'm sure we will. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wafa. Next, we will have the Deputy Chief of Mission from Tunisia, Mr. Mahmoudi.
Good morning, everybody. We'll start with thanking Professor Yona Alexander and the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies for this opportunity to talk to you about this topic, which, as everybody agrees, is a global issue that is affecting all the world and every single day. Unfortunately, we're having proof of that no country is safe and, from this threat. I chose not to overload this presentation, which will be brief with facts and figures and stuff like that, because, well, all this is available to everybody on the internet and on the news and on the media and so on. I chose to have an overfly of the Tunisian experience in that regard, and where we're coming from, and where we are now, and where we would like to go, actually, along with the, obviously, in our context, in the regional context and the global context of the world in general, along with our partners, friends, and allies. Just a few words on the Tunisian background, let's say. Tunisia is a country with more than 3,000 years of history. Tunisia has been, throughout centuries, a receptacle to many civilizations brought about by different peoples from diverse origins who had been coming actually as invaders and occupiers, but who had ended up settling on the land. In so doing, they integrated the local population and bringing their own cultural background. So, I mean, just to mention a few of those so-called invaders: Phoenicians, Romans, Vandals, Arabs, Spanish, French, and so on and so forth. All those came to settle in Tunisia. They have all left their imprint, obviously, and when I spoke of receptacle of civilizations, then this is what I meant. Religion-wise, Jews, Christians, and Muslims have coexisted for centuries in Tunisia as well, and side by side, and culturally very close to each other, to the point that cultures did, at the end, make up a mixture of a new culture, a new identity. Hence the diversity, the openness, the tolerance that are part of our very heritage. It's actually in our genes that this has grown. Now, what on earth, one could say, what on earth could lead such a country like Tunisia to be one of the leading providers of terrorists in this context? I mean, we know that, well, reports say 3, 4, 5, even 6,000 of those so-called jihadists are Tunisians. It amounts to a very obvious concept, and General Kip Ward just mentioned good governance. Actually, if we want to sum up the origin of all that, it's bad governance, or the lack or absence of good governance. Tunisia has gone through a spell of authoritarian regime, so authoritarianism, lack of political freedoms, diverse types of liberties which were not accessible to the population, a growing social divide, an uneven regional development scheme, unequal socio-economic growth, series of governance mistakes. All these have ended up in a certain situation that led afterwards to the appearance of extremism, and that we will see later on. So the totalitarian drift and all the collateral damages have inevitably led to unrest and eventually to revolt. In a situation of despair, obviously, religion offered a soothing, attractive refuge, and the more desperate young people, we're talking especially about the young people, these young people were the more prone to sink into extremism, out of despair, obviously, out of frustration because of the lack of employment and socioeconomic problems in general. So, hence the appearance of those Islamist movements, which spread actually in the Arab world in general, in more or less the same contexts in the whole region and in the Middle East and North Africa, obviously, and turned later on into political trends, coming to represent a credible alternative to the authoritarian oppressive regimes that were in place. The vacuum created by the totalitarian regimes was naturally to be filled by religion, with a tendency, obviously, to radicalization. And it's there that it starts. When we start radicalizing, then we get into the process of extremism and to end up in terrorist activities. With the 2011 upheaval and the ousting of the Ben Ali regime, the Tunisian people opened their way to democracy and freedoms and of all sorts at all levels. Nevertheless, the state apparatus, in so doing, in that process, the state apparatus suffered the real blow due, in fact, to the mistrust, the mistrust-filled climate left over by the outgoing regime. This mistrust generated an acute weakness of the state in front of an aggressive public opinion, so fond of their newly acquired freedoms and liberties, and the strong belief in their ability to establish the rule of the people by the people. That was the ambition, and that was the main objective. So from authoritarianism, Tunisia had moved to a crisis of authority. Sudden profusion of political parties, hundreds of them, hundreds, not to say thousands of NGOs, media, filled up the place all of a sudden. There were 4 or 5 media that were active, and all of a sudden we have tens and dozens and maybe hundreds of them active, all of them vociferating against the ruler, whoever this may be, actually. And this with the background that there's a risk of a totalitarian relapse again, to go back to square one. It is in these circumstances of democratic turmoil that extremist groups found their ways to penetrate not only in the Tunisian territory, but also to infiltrate layers of the society. All sorts of activities like arms smuggling, recruiting among the still desperate youth who did not see solutions to their very problems, to their frustration, we're not seeing all of a sudden that they were hoping that with this change of regime that they would be offered jobs straight away and they would improve their social situation and so on. This was very slow to happen, or maybe not happening at all at some stage. So, and then at that stage, all sorts of activities like, as we said, arms smuggling, recruiting among the youth, establishing and running training camps on Tunisian territory, were evolving without the state apparatus being able to prevent them, because it was simply overwhelmed by so many other problems, by social unrest, by pressure from the union, by political strife, by all sorts of issues that definitely were overwhelming and could not allow the state to be ready to face certain threats. Just a reminder of the facts over the last year, 2015, 4 major terrorist attacks. ISIS claimed responsibility for the 3 of them. An attack against the Bardo Museum with 22 victims. A tourist resort in Sousse, a hotel actually, with 38 victims. The presidential guard bus in Tunis with 12 victims, and the latest and new of its kind attack against the city of Ben Garden in the south of Tunisia, very adjacent to the Libyan border, in which 13 security forces were killed and 7 civilians, while 49 among the terrorists were killed in the same operation. So it's, I said, new in kind, meaning that it was the first time that in this succession of events, apart from the isolated acts or very specific or targeted terrorist attacks, this one was meant to establish a stronghold for what we call the Islamic State in Tunisia. So they were attacking this small city to establish what they call an imara, and to start off what they did in Iraq and in Syria and so on. Commenting on that, I mean, when you see the overall situation, it is actually an asymmetrical war that we are confronted with. The security forces and army are fighting a non-conventional enemy with conventional means. So this is why also, apart from the overwhelming socioeconomic situation and problems, it is also a problem for even the security forces who were never trained to be facing such an enemy. So a new doctrine had to be instated to frame this strategy in this war against terrorism. This strategy is based actually on 4 pillars. That's prevention, protection, follow-up, and response. A whole set of reforms is currently underway to optimize and implement the counterterrorism strategy, with a number of challenges on the ground, like interagency coordination, which is very complicated, and the US have gone through that after 9/11. They had to overhaul the whole system. Establishing a legal framework, which is also problematic because in making legislation to combat terrorism, you have to take special care lest one would compromise on liberties, which in the case of Tunisia, very recently and dearly acquired. So everyone is very careful and very sensitive as far as this sort of laws combating terrorism. Sometimes they would definitely overlap with other laws on freedom of opinion and so on. So the main goals in all this is to reinstate the authority of the state, to improving security governance, establish a sound strategy involving national and international actors, and establishing an articulate socio-economic development strategy to bridge the gaps and restore a healthy economy. Now, in sort of concluding remarks on all this general context, terrorism is definitely a global threat to world peace and security. So the fight against terrorism has to be global. Hence the need for a globally well-coordinated, multidimensional strategy. Such a strategy would never be successful if it is not based on a mutual understanding as for the needs and the specificities of each and every partner in this struggle. And if you look at Tunisia, Tunisia is considered to be a beacon of hope for the success of the democratization process in the region, an experience that our partners like to consider as a model, even though we do firmly believe that there is no ready-made recipes for democratization, and the democracy itself is a very relative concept that, to be implemented, has to take into consideration a particular country's specificities, like historical background, culture, and so on. Now, this model is under serious threat, meaning Tunisia in that very case. It is under serious threat, and it is in the global interest that we come to terms with these threats and continue on the path to success. If a proof is necessary that extremism and terrorism are alien phenomena for Tunisians, the recent events of Ben Guerden that I talked which I mentioned earlier, and the first of a kind defeat ever inflicted to the so-called Islamic State are nothing but a solid testimony on the substance of the Tunisian identity in that regard. I mean, the reaction was huge, and you could see not only the security forces, but population fighting without weapons, without arms, without anything, chasing those terrorists all over the place. So to sum it all up, then failure to set up the right types of cooperation in diverse fields between Tunisia and international partners could lead us to waste an opportunity to promote a pluralistic, inclusive model of governance in the Arab world based on social justice, equal economic opportunity, and security. So again, this has to do to what I stated earlier, that the threat is utterly global, and so must be the response. But being global, it needs to be extremely well coordinated so that it's not ready-made recipes again, but it takes into consideration different aspects and different specificities of every and each partner in this war. Thank you very much.
Dr. Abdulaziz from Egypt, please.
Let me also start by thanking the Potomac Institute, and in particular CEO and Chairman Michael Sutton for organizing this event, and a special thank, of course, goes to Professor Yuna Alexander, who puts a lot of effort and thinking in gathering us to discuss this important issue. And I think I should say also that the remarks I'm going to make represents only myself and not necessarily my country. When I received the invitation for this event, I liked very much the notion of lessons learned. We, the international community, have been fighting terrorism for years and years, and it's important from time to time to have a pause and think and rethink and reconsider what went wrong, what went well, and try to draw lessons in order to do better in the future. In this spirit, I'd like to share with you 7 lessons that I think we in Africa and the Middle East have learned during the last years of fighting terrorism. Lesson number 1, there is no country that can fight terrorism on its own, period. Regional and international cooperation is a must. I'm very glad that General Ward used the term collective responsibility. This is exactly the lesson we have learned in fighting terrorism. 4 days ago, Egypt hosted 27 defense ministers from the Sahel-Saharan region in Egypt. And the topic on their table was how to cooperate better, how to coordinate better, how to share information in order to fight terrorism in their respective countries. 2 days ago, Saudi Arabia also hosted a meeting for chiefs of staffs from selected Islamic countries in order to discuss the same issue, how to coordinate better in order to fight terrorism. But in fact, this is not a lesson learned in the Middle East or in Africa alone. Think about what happened in Brussels last week. Following these tragic events, the EU coordinator for counterterrorism said that only 5 countries out of the whole members of the EU are really sharing information, open source information and classified information that is needed in order to fight terrorism effectively. So it's a necessity also on the EU level. Think globally. Why the member states of the anti-ISIL coalition is growing every single day to reach 66 countries right now. It's because countries are realizing more and more that they cannot fight terrorism on their own. Lesson number 2, and I think General Gray may explain this better than me because I'm a poor civilian. This is, our armed forces are designed, structured, and trained to fight conventional wars. But this fight against terrorism is a non-conventional war. What the US, has learned in Afghanistan after 9/11 is exactly what we are trying to learn right now in our region. And here comes the lesson, that we should not start from scratch. We should not reinvent the wheel. We should start from where you have ended. And here comes the idea of sharing experience. Does it require new training methods for our armed forces? Of course, yes. Does it require new weaponry systems? Yes, of course. New structure, new command and control? I think yes. These are questions that needs to be posed. Lesson number 3 has to do with planning. And this is not me speaking, actually. When I discussed the matter with the military officers fighting terrorism on a daily basis, they tell me that we used to say that military planning needs a lot of experience. So it's for generals to plan and for young officers to execute these plans. We have learned from fighting terrorism that it should be the other way around. It shouldn't be a top-down process. It should be a bottom-up process. Those young officers who are fighting terrorism on a daily basis have the know-how, they experience the terrorists' tactics on a daily basis, so they can feed the planning process very well. The lesson they have learned on the battlefield that if we keep the planning process in the capitals, in air-conditioned rooms, we will lose this fight. Lesson number 4. Professor Yuna Alexander mentioned the number of ISIL fighters. 35 to 40,000 fighters. Add like 10, 15,000 in Boko Haram. Add like 7 to 8 in Shabab, Somalia. Add the others in Taliban. You reach like 70 or 80,000 fighters, terrorists. The question is, how these terrorist organizations were able to recruit this huge number? The answer is simple. They have used 2 tools. First, very attractive religious narrative. 2, they reach out to young people through effective use of social media. And in order, and this is the lesson, in order to fight terrorism effectively, we need to develop a counter narrative to the Takfiri narrative of ISIL, Shabab, Taliban, and Boko Haram. And here comes the importance of religious institutions like Al-Zaytuna in Tunisia, like Al-Azhar in Egypt, and whatever. And comes also the importance of reaching out to those young people. If Twitter and Facebook will help us to reach out to them, we should use them. If local leaders can help us reach out, we should use them. If local languages will help us, we should use them. I remember a very good experience that after Egypt has developed a lot of counter-narrative and counter-fatwas to what ISIL is doing and what Boko Haram is doing, we collected them in a book and we translated into Hausa, which is a very local language in Nigeria. And we went to the very remote villages, distributed in schools and in mosques in order to reach out to those people, and it proved to be very effective. Lesson number 5, development. If we are going to have a tour in the Sahel and Saharan countries in Africa and visit the towns and villages where Boko Haram were very effective in recruiting people, it will be very easy for us to recognize that those are deprived young people and unemployed. So it has to do with development. That's why part and parcel of Egypt's plan to combat terrorism in Sinai is to allocate 10 billion Egyptian pounds in order to create jobs and build schools and hospitals for those young people. Creating hope is important. And this has to do also with the good governance aspect General Ward mentioned in his opening remarks. Lesson number 6, technology. And this is always a forgotten dimension in our discussion. Think of a country like Libya, with long borders with Egypt, with Tunisia, with Chad, and other countries. How can a country like this fight the cross-border terrorism? Neither Libya nor other country can afford using traditional ways to secure these borders, meaning to deploy one tank every single kilometers. They cannot afford to do it. Egypt cannot afford to do it. Tunisia cannot afford to do it. But if we have the high-tech equipments, we can do it. And here comes the question whether the developed countries are ready to provide the underdeveloped countries with this high-tech equipments or not. It's not only related to securing borders. It also relates to the tactics of ISIL. I'll tell you a story. The international coalition were able to liberate Sinjar, Ramadi, and Tikrit in Iraq last year only. But look what ISIL did before withdrawing from these 3 major cities. They left a lot of mines and IEDs behind them in order to prohibit refugees and IDPs from returning back to their homes and towns. The Iraqi government is facing a lot of challenges cleaning and clearing these minefields. They need a lot of high-tech equipment once again. This is a repeated story, not only in Iraq, but in Syria, in Libya, and in elsewhere. So once more, it's up to developed countries to decide whether they are ready to provide these high-tech equipments or not. Lesson number 7, sectarianism. And this is also mentioned by Professor Yun Alexander. The fact is, the Sunni victims of ISIL is more than the Shiite victims, than the Christian victims, and than the Yazidi victims. Don't ever be deceived by the narrative of sectarian rift or sectarian violence. It's a political conflict at the end of the day. Those people are using religion, are using sects in order to achieve, or not using, misusing this religious narrative in order to achieve political goals. It's not about religion, it's not about different sects. Let me conclude by a question. Are those 7 issues lessons that we, the international community, have already learned, or those are lessons that we should learn? I think we should come back to this question in the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor Hamo from Morocco, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to tell you that I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's very difficult to be the last speaker, and I will try to be very brief and share with you some reflections about this topic. We heard a lot about lessons. And in my country, Morocco has been victim of a terrorist attack. The first one was in Casablanca, in May 2003. since this time, we learn a lot of lessons, and we learn these lessons. And since this time, we start practically with the strategy, multi-dimensional strategy. And the Moroccan approach today, we can say that we are in front of some success experience. We start, first of all, this strategy around 3 pillars. The first pillar was good governance and security good governance. Of course, we are facing asymmetric war, and we have to deal with this emergent threat. So our security services had to adapt all what they did before as work. And the first and the very important step was how we can bring all the Moroccan security services to have deeper cooperation. So the first step was the cooperation between security services. And we had to give to these security services more capability and more, of course, training. And we can say that we have today a very good experience, and we know more about these groups, how they deal, how they recruit, where they can find the funding, and what kind of organizations they have, and with whom they are linked inside or outside Morocco. The second pillar, managing religious spectrum. In managing the religious spectrum, we had, first of all, to start training imams and open this mission to women. And I can say that this experience in all the Arab world and the Islamic world is very important, because we know, all of us, the important role of the women in our society. Bring them to the mosques and give them training and give them the opportunity to act as murshidat, but can say exactly as the imam in some case. This experience of training imam, the objective was to bring the imam to play their role. And the role of the imam must be prayer and prayer. It was the opportunity for us to cut the road for the others who use mosques as space to give violent and extremist speech and political speech too. Of course, this experience today, we share it with a lot of other countries in Africa, in Arab world, and in Europe. We start to train some imam from France, from other European countries are asking Morocco to share with them this experience. We do it with Mali, with Ivory Coast, with Guinea, and other countries. The third pillar, and as all my friends said before, that we have to go to this human development and, of course, to be near of all the needs in the poor areas and to take care of the social and economic deficit in some areas. For this, the strategy of human development give today very important result and very good result. We can say that this strategy today give to Morocco the opportunity to face these groups. And as you can observe in this strategy, we have one pillar, what we can say, that we are working on the short term is the governance security pillar, and the two others, how we can work on the long term. But facing terrorism for Morocco, it's a very big challenge, but in the same time, the aim of this strategy is how we can fight terrorism and continue to build democracy. How we can fight all this extremism, but in the same time, how we can keep what the Moroccan choice since more than 1 decade as goal for their destiny to be a state of law and to build democracy. It gives us today a lot of elements that in this context, regional context, we can continue. As you know, Morocco is, I will say it, the oldest state in all the region. And the Moroccan political system, the monarchy, is one of the older monarchy in all the world. Our political system, our state in Morocco, is there since 788. So when we deal with Morocco, we have to keep in our mind that this state have a very deep and long story. Because of that, we have a very good, the state have a very good control of all the national territory and a very important proximity from the citizens. And in the same time, we have the chance that the king is not part of the political game. So all the Moroccans have the most important confidence on the king and in the monarchy. So we can have, and they have the feeling that they have one mediator and the one who will be the last institution on which they can, of course, ask some responses. The new context today is completely different in our region from the first bombing in Casablanca in 2003. Now we have to face a new emergent threat, and I think that in the Moroccan strategy, first of all, we have all these non-state violent actors in this region, militias, rebels groups, separatist groups, terrorist groups, criminal groups, and so. And Of course, our friend from Libya talked about some groups. We can say only in Libya we have nearly 300 militias and military groups. And when you go a little bit to this arc of Sahel and Sahara, all these rebels and separatist groups dealing with all the terrorists and linked today to all these terrorist groups and the transnational organized crime. For this reason, I think that the Moroccan approach take on this time, in one hand, and as the major goal, the terrorism and the terrorist groups. We have certainly Daesh, as you said, but we still have Akim, and we can observe on this time that Akim is acting in a lot of African countries, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Ivory Coast, and others. We still have today a very bad and important activity of, as my friend General Kipor said, Boko Haram. We talk less maybe about Boko Haram, but it's one of the bad and very bad groups. And Al-Shabaab. The second point, when we focus on the terrorist groups, in the Moroccan approach, we never put the transnational organized crime. We have in this region a very important activity, and what we learn that today, and I'm realistic, I'm not optimistic, not pessimistic, but just realistic. We are moving for more instability in this region. And the future in this region is with a lot of uncertainty. So we have to change. And in our region, we have to do our homework. And we must move out just to put some concept, but to have some real strategy and to act, all of us, as responsible states. Unfortunately, we still have some kind of thinking in this region who will not help for. And we still have some dreams on some kind of pivotal role in this region. It will bring more disaster. And we still have some people, bad informed or non-informed, come in with some proposal or solution, and it will be a disaster. I think that today we know that we have to, and the major concern will be for us, the foreign fighters. We have 1,500 Moroccan foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq. 495 was killed, 217 returned to Morocco, but we have 1,000 from Algeria, and we have 5,200 from Tunisia, and I can move around. If we go just to in the north, we have 1,700 from France, foreign fighters coming from France, and we have 815 from Belgium, 415 from Germany, 500 from UK, even Sweden, 120. I can go around a lot of countries, because what we know today, that Daesh, and this is for the first time, a terrorist group had this important number of foreign fighters. And the number today is around 45,000 foreign fighters. What we observed last month, that more than 4,000 are back from Syria and Iraq to Libya. We know also that a lot of young people from the region who haven't the opportunity to move to Syria and Iraq and now to Libya are still in. They have today the capability, they have all what they need as money, and they have weapons. So how we can face this global enemy with only national policies? It will be very difficult. We are facing a global enemy. We need global responses, and we need global strategy. The second element is transnational organized crime. And I think that in this issue, we talk less about drug trafficking. And I remember with General Kipword in Stuttgart that we had once, years ago, a very important program about this issue. Today, 185 tons from cocaine arrive every year to the western of Africa and Sahel-Sahara region. It represents 25% from the international market of cocaine, and the needs of the European market from cocaine come from there, and is 32% from this need. 1 kilo of cocaine today in Sahel, Sahara, they can sell it at 24,000 euro. You can observe that there is no place for other soft drugs, hashish or cocaine or cannabis or others, nothing around. The second element is the proliferation of weapons. One of the consequences of the Libya wars was that today we have a lot of open markets in this region of Sahel. More than 10 years ago, you could buy one AK-47 from Chinese origin around $75. You can have today in the Sahel AK-47 one-star Russian for less than $55. And this proliferation of weapons, we have not only small arms, but we know that a lot of missiles are there, especially some 7 and other kind of missiles. So it's a very, very big concern, and we know today that all these groups are working together, cooperating together, and using all what they control as zones and as, of course, roads. We know that the Latino American cartels today are very established in the Sahel and Sahara. We know that they have the opportunity to find somewhere in the southeast of Algeria, some groups who are speaking Spanish, they use them as guide and they use them in this illegal activity. We know also that this phenomena of illegal immigration and smuggling, human smuggling, is very, very important activity, and the terrorist groups use this tragedy, human tragedy, for their goals. For this, and the last point in the Moroccan strategy is that we believe that we need the international, regional and international cooperation. Morocco is open to this, and he did it, sharing information, sharing intelligence, helping other countries. We had examples with France after the attacks in Paris, in Belgium, after and before Brussels, and with a lot with the Spanish government, with a lot of other, even with Ivory Coast today, and a lot of other countries. But we believe that we need to build our own regional strategy and not to have external intervention in the region. It will be bad response and bad solution. But in the same time, doing our homework, how can we cooperate in this region? If you still have, and we had all the time, we are happy to share with the Korean that the border is closed. We have the second example between closed border between Morocco and Algeria. It can give you the idea that we no way to cooperate against this enemy. For this reason, I think that we need today to act as a responsible state and to move out a lot of paradigm coming from one other history and other area. We have to build the future, and the future we will be either all of us safe or all of us victims. And I hope that we will choose the life and we will build for the future of our child all over the world. More stability, more comprehensive, and more inclusive policies and approaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll try to open up for Q&A for the general and panelists. Please identify yourself. Yes, sir.
My question is for General Ward. So far, the war on terrorism focused mostly on security and counterterrorism efforts. How could the U.S. and the international community deal with poor governance, political exclusion, economic grievances, and corruption?
Thank you. I think based on my experience and what I see as a way ahead in a total sense, I talked about how we cooperate in many of our security apparatuses, from intelligence fusion centers and cells to collective training events to combined and joint warfighting activities to address these specific threats. You heard the comment made by a colleague here on stage to the left with respect to these tactics are clearly important tactics to address bad actors on the scene, and we have to do that. And I think we must devote resources to that. At the same time, to address it over time, to do those things that are required to promote long-term stability, to get at the root cause of why these things are allowed to exist, we must do more. And so therefore, the thrust of what I talked to with respect to sustained developmental engagement, sustained diplomatic engagement, those are things that likewise, in my mind's eye, ought to have the same priority, if you will, in a collective way as we move ahead. It's not the U.S. requirement to do it. I believe it is the requirement of the world of nations to participate in activities that, one, provide an understanding of the region, the area that those activities are to exist in, such that it does things that are commensurate with what's needed by the population, not from our perspective, but from the perspective of those who are there. And then based on that, be deliberate in conducting activities that will address these things that, and I use the term, and that's a term that I like, so that's why I use it, that will provide this horizon of hope. Can't get everybody, and it won't be perfect, but it will sure go a long way to address the conditions that underlie the undercurrent positions that breed these things because folks feel a sense of despair. And it's a long investment, it's a long endeavor. It won't happen overnight. We got to be persistent, and we have to be focused, and we have to remain to it over time for it to see a result. It's a generational activity in my mind's eye. Sir.
Okay, please. Sharon? Okay.
Sorry. I have a question on eventually many of these fighters will return with a lot of combat experience, especially directed toward Mr. Mahmoudi, Uhammo, and Boughairis. These people will come back. What preparations are being made? What strategy to manage to deal with the returning nationals?
Thank you, sir, for that question. Well, actually, it's one of the major issues that we have to deal with because the returnees are already there, and some of them even indulge in some of the acts that have been committed so far. So definitely, it's a whole strategy that has to be implemented in that regard. And there, I mean, as I said in my remarks, it's a kind of tricky situation and very sensitive because we have to deal with those people and to give them a special treatment because to avoid any further activities and so on. But the issue is also to preserve their rights and to be in line with human rights and so on, which is rather a little bit difficult. So definitely there is a special strategy for that, and we are trying to frame these people. I mean, well, the thing is that they be monitored and they be taken care of and they be followed closely to avoid any relapses or any sorts of malveillant activities. So, I mean, but again, it is still a difficult approach and a difficult situation that we have to face.
In Morocco, we resolved this problem. We had this vacuum, jurisdictional vacuum. Now we have the law and the must, of course. All the 215 are now in the prison. I think they are criminal. Of course, we have to respect their law as in other criminals, but in the same time, we have to protect the society. So we couldn't did it before 10 years ago, but today we are respecting all what we can have as guarantees to any criminal. So they are criminal, and they have to, of course, be treated as criminal.
Air Commodore Tenhav, I'm the Dutch Defense Attaché. First of all, to all panel members, thanks for your presentations. And my question is to General Ward. General, your appeal for having this comprehensive 3D approach, defense, diplomacy, development, it really is something we can fully support. I mean, it's policy in my country, we do it. Also at undersecretary level, we have integrated Cabinet of the Prime Minister, the Ministry of Development, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They talk on a weekly basis. We operate that way, whether it's in Mali, it's our leading principle. But my question is the following. When we do this, it takes a long stamina for our societies, because here we are in present societies that wants quick results, that wants quick action, that wants to see results today and not in a year. And my question is, could you elaborate on, I think that's a thing that's overlooked, but we need to have a strategic communication, a strategic stamina, and how do we do it to keep support in our societies for these very long-term approaches, because we all know that development doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, Commodore, that's a great question. It's a great point, and thanks for your service as well. I'm familiar with what goes on in your country, obviously having worked with your forces in these endeavors and the importance of it. Two quick things, and I won't belabor this. Whatever a nation does, the nation will do in its own national interests. So how we develop a narrative that will allow citizens of our respective nations to include the people in the respective countries where these things must go on, so that they know these things are in their national security interests, in their best interests. We clearly have that problem here in America. And so the narrative that was talked about here with respect to how it's made to be understood that would, unlike centuries ago when great seas provided barriers, when great mountain ranges provided barriers, when deserts provided barriers, no longer the case. It was made to point with respect to Sahara and the trafficking. These terrorists that are just bad guys use the same ancient routes, drug traffickers, weapons traffickers, human traffickers. They all use these same systems. Those things impact our neighborhoods. Doesn't matter if it's in America, in Europe, in Asia, because of the global commons, where we are with technology, transportation, markets, access to resources, all those things that advantage populations globally have to be dealt with such that we see where we are, that our ability to sell a product, to receive a product may come from anywhere in the global commons, be it agricultural, be it technological. And this piece of equipment right here, if your neighbor in the Netherlands or my neighbor in Michigan knew that where its components were from, let's make sure we have access to that. So how we develop a narrative that lets every citizen understand that what goes on globally has an impact on them locally. And unfortunately, we don't devote time to that. As you said, we are a fast food group of folk, but that doesn't say that we must give up, that we can give up on promoting that narrative. And we must persevere and just not give up. Just like old Lou Millet in the Korean War, when he was charging that hill, and he was out of ammunition, and he turned around and he looked at his infantry soldiers and said, our mission is to take that hill. And the soldiers looked at, hey, boss, we have no ammunition. He said, well, we got legs and we got bayonets. Fix them, let's go. So we have to use any means we have to continue to deliver that message, to move forward, even in the face of those who don't want to hear it, but we should not, because they don't want to hear it, fall away from delivering it.
Obviously we're all done, right?
Just the beginning.
just the beginning.
Well, Yoni, if nothing else, Dr. Alexander, you certainly are consistent because once again, we're out of time and I've been asked to speak. And so I'm just going to say thank you to all of you for being with us today. It's been very informative. Thank you to all the panelists and the like. And I would say, just in passing, obviously we need a global strategy. Obviously, all of the free world has to get involved. Obviously, it has to have regional connotations and so on because the regions are very important and they're different, and it must be adaptive along the way. And we ought to be able to decide now what we want to look like 10 or 15 years from now and then turn to and make it happen. One word that really hasn't been mentioned today, which I think is crucial, and that's education. We have got to educate in America our people, and we've got to educate the free world as we know it today on what this terrorist idea and what is all about and what jihad really, really means. And we have to go back centuries and really study the history of what this means. We need to understand how the Arabic linguist mind works, and when you analyze that, and these words mean different things to different people, and above all, it means a different thing to the jihadists, and we have to understand also how these words have changed. What jihad in the beginning really meant effort and the like, unity of effort. It's changed now, and it changed in the beginning of the 20th century and the like, and it has to do now with conquering. And so, you know, it's up to us. Do we want to be conquered, or do we want to remain free? And we need to remember, too, that many of the free world, they really need security right now, even more than freedom and democracy. That's what we have to be able to provide, too. So it's a very complicated issue, but it starts, in my judgment, with education. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.